Okay. I'm going to call meeting of the Committee of the Whole order at 5:32 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Connor Childers. He works behind the scenes to produce the board broadcast on Channel 20. I'd also like to wish a warm welcome to the Superintendent Student Advisory Council Representative Kanaya Parks Collins, and you're from Guilford High School. So welcome and thank you for being here. We have the meeting minutes from August 2nd. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Okay, head shakes, no. So if not, do we have consensus to approve? Yes, yes, yes. Thumbs are nicest through the screen, thank you. I am going to remind everybody to hold your questions until after the presentations as we move into the Internal and External Stakeholders Committee. I'm not sure who's presenting tonight. That would be Ms. Pearson. Your floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And before I go into the information, I don't want to forget to thank the many individuals that had back-to-school celebrations. Some of the faith-based community is mentioned in the presentation, but I wanted to acknowledge Empowering Word Christian Church, Pastor Latoya and Elvin White, for the sacrifice that they made and giving out iPads and gift cards and school supplies, and many of the schools in Subdistrict A coming together in one location at the Auburn campus with Mrs. Jones and Ms. Cuffer, along with parent liaisons that made it a really successful event. And we'll mention more during this presentation. So school is back in session. Classes began on Thursday. That was a pretty cool introduction. How about that? Everybody's awake now? So as I was saying, school is back in session, which began on Thursday, September 1st. So we are about to take a look at the first day and enjoy the remainder of the slideshow and video. righty, we are celebrating RPS 205 Marching Band. This year's combined marching band camp was held August 17, 18, and 19 at Auburn High School. The main goal of the camp was to teach the students how to parade march, but there were also sectional breakouts for percussion, brass, and woodwinds. In addition to the sectionals, the musicians held mass rehearsals and participated in marching drills. Thank you to the staff who were willing to impart their knowledge and love of music to the students. Celebrating RPS 205 Admit Picnic. I understand that was a huge success. The Admit Central Office Picnic was held on Friday, August 26th at the Admit Building. The annual picnic is a way to thank our district staff, including our facilities, transportation, and operations support center staff, and to welcome the new school year. This year, barbecue lunch was served by our cabinet members. Give them a hand for their service. Thank you, RPS 205 district staff, for all you do. 205 Vibe. The top item on 205 Vibe for this week was RPS 205 teacher agreed to 4-year contract. Be sure to read about Joseph Kuth, Auburn's head chess coach, and the 205 Vibes featured blog post. Auburn High School's chess coach, master for a weekend. And look forward to our next podcast featuring our Dr. Antoine Reed, RPS 205's chief officer, is coming soon. In our legislative news, we had our monthly Zoom meeting with our lobbyists a few weeks ago. We discussed several bills in depth and learned more about the bill process and legislative calendar. In an effort to build relationships with the other legislators who can help pass our district priorities, Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Dotson Jr. met with Senator Christina Paquillon-Zayas. I apologize if I mispronounced that. The senator is active in early childhood education, and evidence-based funding. After the elections, we are looking forward to meeting with our representatives in person. Dr. Jarrett and Dotson Jr., you're not sharing at this moment? Okay, thank you. The last few weeks have been busy with training, meetings, and orientation for our parent liaisons, principals, teachers, and more. Continuous improvement is one of our core values, and the weeks leading up to the first day of school are filled with opportunities for our staff to connect with each other, grow, and learn. There is a realtor update. One of the priorities and endeavors of the stakeholder committee is to maintain a close, positive relationship with key external stakeholders. Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Dotson Jr. reported on media relationship last month. In August, they met with groups of realtors in the Rockford area. Please listen to their findings. Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Dotson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pearson. The meetings with realtors, it's a very important stakeholder group because one realtor may impact 20 or 30 people, sometimes 50 to 100 in a given year, depending on the size of their volume, and they often carry very significant messages about the perception of the school district. So this was very much a two-way conversation. We offered a lot of time to answer questions and learn about realtor perspectives on how the district is perceived. We also spent a great deal of time sharing things that the district has done, tax policy is a very fertile area. We talked about our commitment to a system-wide framework and a number of other important initiatives. The conversations went well, were extremely well attended, and we plan to continue them with other real estate groups as the year goes on. But this is definitely a very strategic partnership because of the outsized influence that realtors have on the way the district is perceived and what we can learn from them as we learn how people outside and inside our community perceive the district in their home purchase decisions. Anything you'd like to add, Earl?
Yes. So I was obviously listening for and trying to connect different themes from all of the groups, connecting something that they all said similarly. So the one thing that I noticed right away with meeting with all three groups is they are pleased with the improvements and updates that we gave. They are pleased with the improvements that we made over the last 10 years. They are aware of those, so they made that known. But they all told us that we need to do a better job of marketing ourselves and telling the community about all the improvements that have happened over the last decade. The second thing that they all kind of talked about was they are aware of our improved tax rate. That has resonated with that group. They feel that they can easily talk about that when a prospective home buyer. They feel that that's something that they can easily disseminate and give that information out, whether they're at a friend's at an event. So they can certainly they have that information available to them. So that was good to also hear. And then they also, when we presented information about the International Baccalaureate School, they all were interested in that information. They talked about how prospective buyers ask about that when they are interested in moving to the area. Families looking for homes are certainly interested in that. In the IB school. And then the last thing they all asked and asked about was they're very interested in volunteering and mentoring in our schools. And so we made sure that we provided opportunities for them to be able to do that. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing, Dr. Jarrett and Mr. Dotson. Our community partnership update with West Middle School. West Middle School held a back-to-school barbecue on Tuesday, August 30th for all their 6th through 8th grade families. In addition to food and a DJ, the students could pick up their schedules, tour the school, purchase uniforms and spirit wear, and meet their teachers. It's great to see our school's creativity and engaging with our families. Community partnership update. We want to give a big thanks to all of our business, churches, and individuals who donated school supplies to our students this year. I can't stress enough how important it is to have those necessary items you need to have a successful day at school. So everyone that participated in that, you have no idea the impact that it made on our families, which is absolutely important to us. It was from 50 headphones donated to Carlson Middle Elementary to specially requested headbands donated to Kennedy, to 2,000 backpacks filled with school supplies donated by City First Church. The Rockford community may be extremely generous, has been extremely generous to our students, and we want to say thank you. We have our board calendar, and we can see that the board calendar have the dates that are highlighted for this month. We want to mention the Rockford Chamber annual dinner on September 15th, and Rockford Promise, Raise the Roof on September 17th. For more information on either of these events, please contact Laura Fromm. Lastly, we want to give you a heads up that a survey will be included in the superintendent's report update this week. We are looking for your input regarding the district website to help us with our continuous improvement efforts. Thank you. Are there any questions? Back to you, Ms. McCauley.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Ms. Stanford will now lead the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting.
Thank you. The first item is the Certified Administrator Teacher Compensation Report and IMRF Compensation Report. Are there any questions or comments about those reports? Okay.
Well, does somebody would just want to give us a summary of the increases or changes?
I can do that. This is basically information that we're just required to present to the board and then post on our website. This is the same kind of information that we turn into TRS and IMRF. And then in addition to these two reports, there'll be the big comprehensive report that you guys are accustomed to seeing that lists all the different salary and benefits for all the different positions throughout the district. So these are very specific for admin and teacher reporting requirements. So just a simple report out and posting on the website.
And so it's not because you were bringing it forward as increases. This is following the contract for the REA and then whatever we put in place last spring for the fall for administration.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Our second item, 7B, is the final strategic plan presentation representing the culmination of the administration's work to anchor the strategic plan to the system-wide framework. Presenting tonight will be Matt Zedeker, who oversees the accountability team.
Good evening. Tonight we are going to go over the strategic plan and system-wide framework. Over the last 18 months to 2 years, the board has received information regarding our system-wide framework and strategic plan in pieces. And so this presentation really is meant to kind of pull it all together in one package for the board as we wrap up the creation of the system-wide framework and aligning it to our strategic plan and really moving it to the implementation phase of the work. As we embark upon where we're headed, I think it behooves us to make sure that we just kind of identify some key points throughout the timeline of this work. This work really started back in December of 2019 as we pulled what we identified as a rally cry team. And the original purpose of this rally cry team all the way back in December of 2019 was to analyze our quality peer review process that we had in our district. And as we began discussing what that quality peer review could look like, how we might improve that for better student outcomes, it became evident that we couldn't really look at the quality peer review system in isolation. We really had to look at our system as a whole. So that led us into really a lot of listening. What the group did was to kind of create items for our focus groups with principals and teachers and have them respond to our concepts and our ideas. They gave us feedback. We then took it back, recreated things, and put it back out in front of them. And that process really got us to the creation of our standards system. And so in 2021, those standards really became a reality. While the work of the system-wide framework was happening in that standard system, we worked with the board as we partnered with an outside vendor for our strategic planning process. What was unique around this is that it's not a traditional strategic planning process that we engaged in. Rather, we had worked with a partner to take a look at the work that was created already in the system-wide framework. How is that in terms of alignment, focus, and clarity for our organization as we embark upon reaching goals that were established in conjunction with the board. And so we embarked on alignment with that strategic planning process. While we're doing that work, another major milestone throughout this process was really reviewing and analyzing at that time what was our local scorecard. If the board remembers, we embarked back in 2017 on creating a local scorecard. And as the system-wide framework and strategic plan kind of really came into fruition, we continued to listen to our principals, and they still wanted some more clarity and alignment on how schools were scored. And so we did that, and we came to the realization that the local scorecard at that time wasn't really in alignment with the work that we were doing. And so we went through a process of analyzing what the state was utilizing for how they were grading our schools, combined with our standards of practice, which really came to the accountability scorecard that we'll talk about later on in the presentation. Again, during that time, as part of a standard of service, we created the Data Governance Committee, because one important factor to all this work around strategic planning and the system-wide framework was really the idea of the use of data. Do we have dashboards that schools can access? Is the information accurate? Is it timely? And is it user-friendly so that schools can actually use the data to work with their leadership teams on school improvement planning, on any adjustments or movements that need to happen throughout the course of the year based off of what they were seeing with data? And that really brings us then to tonight. As we think about our strategic plan, I think what's really important on this slide is the idea that our system-wide framework supports the work of the strategic plan. The system-wide framework is how Rockford Public Schools will become the first choice for families. It is how we will reach our universal goals. The system-wide framework is how we will look at interrupting predictability of student outcomes. And so it's really important as people think about our strategic plan that the system-wide framework is really the how behind achieving the goals that have been set within our mission, vision, and the goals of the universal goals. So as we think about our strategic planning, what's in front of you is really the one-page, high-level, front-facing document that represents the work. You can see on this document our vision and our mission. You see the universal goals as a focal point in the middle. And then towards the bottom, the work, the how, through clear expectations in our standards, creating learning environments that work for all in our equity imperative, and then using the data that we have from results to drive decision making. And so for the purpose of this presentation, you'll see that the following slides will break each one of these down, but I think it's really important to highlight that this one pager really encapsulates the work and where we're headed as a district. So to stay in alignment and that strategic, focused approach with strategic planning, our mission and vision didn't change. Our values that were created remain the same. Our theory of action, and this was a key component to our outside vendor as they examined our work with the system-wide framework and really identified that the theory of action that we utilized to create the process, the standards, really could utilize some beefing up and some more clear criteria to use as an overarching theory of action for the work. And so we spent some time with our vendors and partners working on this theory of action, and essentially this theory of action is the saying that when we clearly define expectations for all staff, balance support, accountability, collaboration, and commit to continuous improvement, then each student in every school and every neighborhood will reach their full potential. And that directly aligns to where we are with our equity imperative. We want to create those learning environments that work for all of our students to interrupt the predictability of student outcomes based on zip code, and that is the work. So I know the board has seen this picture time and time again, but I think it's important to bring it back forward to where are we in terms of the predictability for our students, and certainly not where we want to be. We want the strategic plan and the work within the system-wide framework to take us to neighborhoods and schools that interrupt that predictability. So our universal goals, which are a focal point of that strategic plan, and certainly on the summary page of the one-pager, it's important to note that because we are finalizing data from the state, we will be utilizing our baseline data, and we will update our universal goals to show where we are and where we need to go by 2024 as we complete the strategic plan. Standards. For the standards portion of system-wide framework and the strategic plan, I think what's really important to note here is that these descriptors, these sentences, were actually created prior to the standards. And so the Rally Cry team utilized these descriptors, these sentences, to help guide the work as the creation of the standards and utilizing that with the focus groups. And so as we're thinking about the standards and how that drives our work, it was really important for the group to create standards that were within our control, that were focused and limited, measurable and visible, that we established district-wide checks and balances. We had lead indicators for lag measures. We intentionally created to meet common goals, and they were based on a collective knowledge of agreed upon rationale. And so that work led us to where we are now with our standards of practice and our standards of service. The results, and again, I know the board has seen our results, and we've described our results on more than one occasion, but for our general ed kindergarten through 12 buildings, our state summative score, and this is for the scorecard portion outside of the standards of practice, the state summative score that we receive, and we'll finalize yet this fall, represents 75% of that scorecard. The universal goals represent 15%, and climate and culture 10%. Early childhood is slightly different, where they have the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale, or ECHRS, as an internal score of 60%, and then climate and culture for 40%. So when we think about strategic plan and the resources, we knew that it was important to have access for individuals to know more, to learn more, to have a place where these are housed as we continue to reflect back on in the process. So we do have our one page that's available for our folks, and we've had resources provided for our principals and teachers as they came back to school this year to remind them of the work within the strategic plan and the system-wide framework. But we also have created a lot of documents and resources within our website for our internal employees at this time. We are working on documents and communication for outside partners, our parents and community. But the first step in creating documents and resources was for our internal employees to utilize as they engage in the work. And I think that what's really neat to note here is the design of our resources. They are located on the website, and they are written at a fairly high level overview of the different components of our strategic plan. But what we've done is embedded links for individuals who are interested to learn more. And so you can click on a link to dive further into different components of our strategic plan. So an example of one might be is that you link on the link for either a standard of practice or standard of service, and we have a whole document, a whole book just on our standards of practice. Teachers, administrators can dive further into the why behind selection of certain standards. There is a link that takes you to the research as to why they were selected. And so we've designed it for folks that if they want to stay high level and just get an overview, there's documents, but there's the ability to dive further and get to know more about the why behind the different components of our strategic plan. I know the board, again, has seen this, the accountability dashboard. This goes back to the creation of data that principals can use. And this dashboard, which was created with our data governance committee, has those drill down links. So as you see the blue hyperlinks, it takes you to additional data that can be utilized in the teaching and learning process in the PLCs to dive in to say, where are our gaps? Where are our needs? How do we need to make sure that we're pivoting and making decisions based off of this data as we plan and deliver our lessons and our curriculum? You will notice, again, at the very bottom, that when we get state data back this fall, we will have an accountability score and a level. It'll be both numeric and color-coded based off of that criteria that you see in front of you. So what's next? What comes next as we're moving from the creation phase to the implementation phase? As we look at schools and receiving accountability scores, there are some options of supports that the central office is working on providing. This is by no means an exhaustive list, nor is it finalized. But some of the supports that we are going to target in on schools based off of their scores and the needs that they have are options such as mandated focus on school improvement cycles. What does your data tell you? How can we guide the leadership teams at buildings for those school improvement cycles? Does there need to be a more frequent touch point so that we can offer our support for schools to make sure that the plans they put in place, they're feeling supported and have the resources they need for those? It could revolve around targeted professional learning. What's that highest leverage professional learning that the principals can offer their staff? And then how do we monitor that so that they're just not receiving professional learning, but we're following up to make sure that that professional learning is happening in the classroom and in their PLCs. And then the last kind of optional support that we may apply to schools are some increased management of school resources. How are you using your funding? What decisions are you making with the dollars that you have? What staff do you think and what data are you using for your site-based dollars on some of your optional positions? And what's the time? How are you utilizing and scheduling the adults you have in the building to make sure that students are receiving what they need? So these, again, are just some of the supports that we will be working with buildings on, but there will be more to come as we continue to report out to the board in the fall and then ultimately in the December retreat. So next steps for standards. This August, we worked with principals to launch this year a better alignment of the Danielson framework and teacher evaluations. How can we make sure that we're aligning what we're observing in the classroom and conversations with teachers so that they're aligned to those standards of practice, and in particular, the standards of practice where we're seeing the greatest area of need? Additionally, we are revamping our standards of service survey. We found through last year's administration that we weren't quite getting the information we wanted to have some of the actionable next steps that the departments needed to make sure that we were providing the service to our schools. So we are adjusting that survey to make sure that it's a little bit more department specific to get us that information as department leaders to make changes. We are beginning this month on the first round of standards of practice data collection for the FY23 school year. We'll also be launching the first administration of that standards of service survey in October to our principals and assistant principals. And then November, we'll be getting data back from both the standards of practice and standards of service. It will give us an opportunity to take a look at how we're starting the year off with both of these key data elements and action planning in preparation for a dialogue with the board in December. So our official school scores, we will plan on presenting to the board the November Committee of the Whole meeting once the state's embargo has lifted on those scores. That will give us, again, an opportunity to analyze data to where were the schools last year in that baseline year. What do the scores look like this year under the first round of standards of practice, and what steps need to be taken to support those schools? And I think that information is going to provide us with data to have that dialogue with the board as we look at an academic focus on the December retreat, as we look at our strategic plan and our progress towards our universal goals. And with that, I would entertain any questions that the board has.
Mr. Rollins?
On the accountability dashboard on page 18, so this is for the high schools. So under school scorecard, you're showing 75% summative score from the state, 25% additional indicators, and 10% surveys, which is 110%. And I'm really trying to link this, I'm trying to get this to be consistent with slide 13, which says state summative score is 75%, the universal goals are 15%, and climate and culture is 10%, and the universal goals for high schools are freshman on track rate and graduation rate. And ties in, this leads into my next question, which is, looks like freshman on track is already part of the state summative score.
Yep.
But then we've got it again on there, but then I don't see graduation rate anywhere.
So that's a great point with the high school. In conversation with the high school principals, because freshmen on track is, there is a certain percentage based already on the state scorecard that we get, but because it was a universal goal, they opted to put more percentage or greater weight on that freshman on track for the other 25%. The 25% additional indicators is matches with the 75. Our surveys are a portion of that 25%, so that is that 10% is a typo. It's not in addition. But in terms of the discrepancy with some of the universal goals, that was through the conversation with principals. And part of that conversation was we wanted that additional 25% to be something that they had some control over, because we were moving from a local scorecard where there was some growth metrics and we used local norming. When we went just to the 75% from the state, we took a lot of things out of their control. for that portion of the scorecard. And so through our conversation with the principals, they wanted to put that greater emphasis on freshmen on track because they felt like with strategies they could implement and lead in the school that they had some control over what that rate would be.
And Mr. Rollins, I would just add, if you look at the weighted graduation rate, if you're looking at a total of 4 points, if you take the percentages out of it, 1.5 of those 4 points is tied to graduation rate. It's a huge emphasis on the state scorecard. So this was a way to balance that out. Freshman on track still cumulatively is less than half of what graduation rate is weighted at.
It still doesn't seem like it ties into what slide 13 says, though. It says, so slide 13 says 15% is going to be on the universal goals and 75% is on the state summative. And I don't see, I don't know. It's just not really tracking for me.
The example was, so a better example probably would be with elementary. When you look at the additional 25%, elementary has both IAR math and literacy that work out to be 7.5% apiece for those universal goals. Again, high school is slightly different than middle school and elementary based off of some of the criteria that's in the state scorecard that comes through. But middle school, again, has the middle school on track at 15%. And so those are probably a little bit better examples correlated with that slide versus the high school components that we have in front.
Okay. I just wish you'd make it easier to track from one slide to the other so that we could see exactly how it's being done. You know, the other thing, and I've made this comment before, when you measure something and when you put a focus on something, people will naturally, and this is what we want them to react to it. That's the whole purpose of this. But the concern that I've articulated multiple times with the second two universal goals is that the easiest way to meet those goals is to lower standards, which is not our intention. Correct. And I do hope that we have sufficient guardrails in here to make sure that these schools are not being incentivized to lower standards.
Would completely agree. We've had that conversation many times as we've taken a look at this in terms of the rigor and what's happening in the classroom. So we certainly agree with that sentiment.
Cameron.
So my question is in regard to, I know you said that the focus right now is to roll this out, obviously, to principals, internal employees and whatnot, because they're the ones that essentially have to carry this out. And I guess I would like more insight on what have the conversations been thus far of how we're going to roll this out to the community and to parents, because with this being such a robust strategic plan, I know typically this is public knowledge, so this will be accessible. However, the verbiage in this, just as a board member, has been challenging to try to keep up. So how are we going to simplify this so that way others outside of the district looking from the outside in are going to be able to actually understand the reason why we did this, what we're tracking, and what we're going to do if the scores are not up to par? Like, what have the conversations been like, and whose responsibility is it going to be to make sure that the community is going to have a connection to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a lot of conversation that we've had, especially to the point about the language that we use to make sure that we're clearly communicating. So we're working hand in hand with the communications department to take that information and to make sure that we're using an approach with families that they can understand. Part of the first stages of outside communication that we've discussed and are developing for parents, as we are getting our scores and our colors, it's a descriptor of what does that mean and what parents can do to support the work at the school, as well as what resources are available inside the school and outside the school to support their students in the work. The next phase of that is a parent handbook that would describe a little bit in terms that are a little easier to understand on what that strategic plan is, what those standards are. Again, we would be able to provide links if parents wanted to dive further into the research and why, so that's already created. But that is a part of the process we're working with now on communications to make sure that's getting communicated properly out to parents and the community at large.
So I think the parent handbook will definitely be very helpful. Do we have like an estimate of a time frame of when we'll be able to roll that out?
We are planning on rolling out that this fall. We're doing that in conjunction with some of the state data that's coming out. And so our goal is to have that ready to go this fall, about the same time that those scores would be released.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question. So on slide 22, I think it is, where it just gives the examples of how the high schools can score, and it shows how it's color coded and whatnot. And we have like the red, which is where we want to obviously put a majority of our focus on to improve. What if when we're gathering the data and we're seeing that schools are consistently in the red? I know you said that we'll look at how are you utilizing your funds and your resources, things like that, but what actions are we going to be taking if there are certain schools that are consistently still coming up red and we're taking all these extra steps to give them the additional support that they need?
Yeah, really good question, and that's going to be part of the conversation that we have with the board in December as well. What some of those long-term decisions are for schools that continually don't make progress or are regressing in terms of their scores. That's something that administration and the board need to have discussion and make decisions on as we continue to monitor and offer supports. And if those supports aren't working and aren't changing results, those are some frank conversations that administration and the board have to have in terms of next steps.
Thank you.
So, I flagged 13 and 18 also because we're being given different areas, different percentages. So the percentages that we have differentiated for charter schools and for special programs and for traditional programs, is that the percentages we're seeing at the bottom where standards of practice and school report card are 50-50 on this one, but they're not 50-50 for all of them, correct?
Correct, that's correct. So what you're seeing here would be an example of a general ed K-12 building, high school 50-50. Ms. McCulloch, you are right. The percentages and weights are different. So our special programs, we would have 75% of the total on the scorecard portion and only 25% on the standards of practice. Our charters would be 100% from the state scorecard because they don't have standards of practice. So we do have some variance. This example is just for the general regular K-12 buildings.
And what are our early childhood?
Early childhood is, again, 75-25, 75 from the state and 25 standards of practice.
No, it's 75% standards of practice and then 25% other indicators.
I apologize, you're correct.
And I'm hoping not to waste anybody's time, but I really didn't understand the explanation of the numbers that you gave Dr. Jarrett for, that was on Freshmen on Track, right? Talking about how.
Yeah, we can spend more time with the board on this. This was really meant to the purpose of today's presentation, we probably could have been even more clear, was to connect the dots between the system-wide framework and the strategic plan, that it's one and the same. That was our big takeaway. And we were attempting to go back to some familiar things, and clearly we've got some work to do to continue to come back to the board to walk you through. So what this example on slide 18 attempts to do is it just shows a hypothetical example of a high school. What I was talking about with the numbers, Jude, is that you can do it by percentages, but essentially there's a total of 4 points that are available for the school scorecard. 3 from the summative score, if you take 75%, make that 3 of the 4 points, and 1 of the 4 can come from those additional indicators. So the point I was making is that 1.5 of the 4 points comes from the graduation rating or weighted score. Freshmen on Track, we took 0.25, which is what the state did, and added 0.4, so there was extra emphasis on that. We felt like the weighted grade of 1.5 out of 4 was already enough for grad rate, we thought the freshmen on track, after talking with principals, needed a little more weighting, so it's 0.65 if you add up 0.4. So instead of percentages, you can just add up the raw points as well. So we didn't intend to go into great detail on that. When we do the analysis of the schools at the November meeting, once the embargo is over, we'll be able to walk through this in much more detail. But excellent question, and certainly didn't mean to confuse the board with providing this example here. But it's 75-25, but you could also consider it like a 4-point scale if you want to convert the percentages to numbers.
We're just marking the surveys as just a typo. It shouldn't be on there 10% for that, correct?
Correct.
That's included in the 25.
It's included in the 25. Okay. Well, that does help. My other question was on 16, these standards that are listed, these strategic plan handbook and the standards resources. Where can those be accessed? Are they only under teachers, or would they be on our website and it would be available to all of us?
Right now, they are on our staff portal, part of the website, to have access for any employees. We did share these with the board on August 12th in the superintendent's update. So the links are available for board members as well to access all of those. And then when we finalize all of the out-facing parent and community documents as well, then those links will be on the public side of the website.
The links to these same
Correct.
items. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah. First, let me just say, Ms. Mohammed brought up what I think is a key issue, and I would emphasize that the rollout of this to the community is terribly important. Yes. So thank you, because that was, I'm glad, and that was also brought up by others. And one of my responses here is to say that given the questions that we've had so far, I would say that this is very thorough. So kudos, everybody has really translated this. So I think on the education side, if you've been around a while, this is the most concrete we've had, I think, in forever. So, the one thing I would say to the 3 or 4 people that are probably listening at home is that this is real progress. And, we come back on the detail, but this is quite good. And I don't know how many other school districts have this kind of methodology, but I'd be real interested to know how many actually go through this. So that's the first point, is well done all the way around. But second point, and I think Ms. Mohammed really stated this well, is that we have to translate this for the community. And one of the suggestions as I read through this in my own mind was, as goofy as it sounds, we probably need some kind of, almost like a course, to walk through this thing with an example and arrows and visuals that say A plus B adds up to C, and D is this, whatever the math is, with a real example. And if we have to wait till November, I don't want you to come up with something artificial. I'd like it to be real, but I really believe that having almost like a course, and I don't know what other, because if you put it in standards, and that's great, because there are people who will actually read, God bless, there are people that still read, but most people need it presented, have to ask questions. This is a change, and if I might say so, I think Ms. Mohammed was correct bringing up the community, and I think we have to think of that broadly. So one of my comments is, absolutely the community, including the parents, the people who are in that area, have to understand what a game changer is. However, we have a lot of people in the community, if you will, writ large, like some of the folks we mentioned tonight, like let's say the realtors or the chamber or community groups that are out there. And I would almost say that we have to set aside time and I'm not smart enough, thankfully Mr. Dotson is, to come up with a communication plan around that, because I think that's key to this, is that the board have something concrete that says we're going to be at the following places, here's our schedule, and something about the material behind it that actually explains it so that step by step. And the last thing I'm going to say here is that one of the most important receivers of this info has to be the teachers. And I would say that it would be very easy for this to become, if I might say, punitive. And I'm not saying that's our intention.
Correct.
The intention has been good. We've done a lot of good things. But I really think now that it's concrete, it would be good to have it at some open session with the principals and everybody, and maybe some of the other administrators who came up with all this be there to listen to what people have to say, answer questions, and then look forward to the things where it can improve. And I would say, let's make this methodical. Let's put this in a plan on all these aspects and come back to the board. And maybe this is already baked into the November, and so great. If you've already got it there, then I'll emphasize how important it is. But one of the things here is, let's take good work and let's come up with a plan that explains that good work to everybody. And I'm emphasizing the teachers, because I think there's a lot of holdover from old attitudes of people who are of the mindset that I'm going to survive all the administrators here, so I'll just ignore it. And we all know that's a real thing, and that's no knock against teachers. That's what the reality has been. Because I think the other part is that, as we have, and we all know, and in case you don't, in April, there's going to be an election, and there's going to be a lot of turnover even amongst the board. But I think it's important to have something down. And I will say this, with no hesitation, one of the things that's helped us make progress is stability. We've had enough instability in various parts, but having stability and having something like this that's taken a while to put together is really critical. And again, I can't say enough, thank you to everybody for all the thought behind it. But I think now the execution of this is really probably the thing we should be spending a lot of our time on.
Yep, agreed. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll make this really brief. I just want to add, as we educate our community, if we will consider doing some videos. There's parents, you have grandparents, and in a few cases, great-grandparents that have their children. So technology just may not be their strength, and literacy is a global issue. And so we want to make sure, as we address the social determinants, that we communicate, whether it's in the languages, other languages that our students speak, video clips, to make sure that the community at large is able to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. We'll move on to the consent items for September meetings. A through F are our standard items. G and H are bids. I is the master teacher, professional development for paraprofessionals. Paras will complete a predetermined number of webinars that align to a general area. These hours of professional development should increase the paraprofessionals' effectiveness when working with children. This also gives the paraprofessionals that complete group of modules credits towards a salary increase. The district initially provided this program in the 2021-22 school year. This year, paraprofessionals completed 2,350 courses on the website. J, and we'll take questions at the end. J is the NIU Principal Pipeline Residency. K is Richard L. Johnson, Secure Vestibule Design. The contract with Richard L. Johnson is for the design of the 9 remaining secure vestibules: Eisenhower, Flynn, Guilford, Kennedy, Lincoln, Marshall, Nashville, Summerdale, and West. L is for the recurring contract. Brightly Software, formerly Dude Solutions, is the current software utilized for establishing and tracking maintenance work orders for repairs throughout the district and preventative maintenance work orders for equipment repairs. M is the Cintas Uniform Rental. This contract provides weekly uniforms for each RBMA member and includes an ancillary cost for floor mats. Are there any questions about the consent agenda items? Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. On letter I, in regards to the paraprofessionals, I had 2 questions. Will these opportunities apply to our sub-paras that I believe we have another agency getting them connected with the school district?
We use Maxim staff members.
Right.
We wouldn't allow the Maxim staff members to participate in this. They're CNAs and not paraprofessionals. So the work doesn't really match up with the PD that we would provide.
Within the last couple of years, we contracted with a company that, for some reason, I'm thinking was also called Insight to to help find substitute paraprofessionals. Am I correct on this?
I'm not aware of anything like that.
Were we not outsourcing some of our acquisition of substitute paraprofessionals?
We did have a brief contract with a different provider last year, but we came back to Maxim. I can't remember off the top of my head.
That was a company. Discgritter was supposed to help provide paraprofessional staffing, and that didn't work out well at all.
Oh, okay, so we no longer have.
No,
because they were also trying to get us substitute teachers too. Of course, now that I'm saying the last couple of years, I'm forgetting that we had a pandemic. This may have been a little longer ago than that. Like effing 2020, come on.
Weren't those CNAs just for SPED students, though? We weren't contracting for general.
Yeah, the CNAs are typically in our self-contained classes.
So to answer your specific question, no. It is just for RPS employees, full RPS employees.
No, just an ancillary question. Do we still contract with anyone to help us get paraprofessionals?
Maxim provides us CNAs that take place of a paraprofessional.
All right, thank you. Also saw a statement in here that says if paraprofessionals receive an increase of pay due to the training, it could increase staff morale. I'm assuming that there are not incentives attached to the completion of these modules, but rather it could qualify them for maybe a hard to fill, and so they.
Yeah, so with every set of modules they take, they can get a credit towards a salary increase. So they have to get 5 credits towards a salary increase to move forward with that. So that's the incentive behind it.
Okay, thank you. I guess if anyone asks questions on I'll be quiet. Otherwise, I wanted to ask about J. We good? Okay. In J, the background opening line says we currently have 140 teachers that are certified to be principals for our district, and they are not interested in applying for vacancies. And this is a contract to provide the opportunity for teachers to get a master's program designed to help them qualify to be principals, which I'm quite supportive of the program, and I think building our own principals is absolutely the right thing to do. So, yeah, I think that's great. I'm just struck by this statement and why it was even added to the rationale, because it seems like if we already know we have 140 teachers who are certified to be principals, and I guess I'd ask, why are they not interested in applying for the vacancies, and do we have some quantifiable evidence to suggest that we need to invest this money in other people who may very possibly just get added to the 140?
So I'd love to dive in. This is the essence of a labor market disconnect that was created decades ago. And the very design of this program is designed to combat the problem. And here's what would happen for years and years and years and years, not just in our district, but across the country. Teachers are compensated and moved to what we say move to the right on the pay schedule by getting a master's degree. Doesn't matter necessarily if that master's degree makes that individual better at their current teaching job. They just need to get a master's degree. And 2 master's degrees is even better, because then you get a master's plus 40 and you move all the way to the right on the pay scale. So that can mean $8,000 to $10,000 a year more for a teacher, even though it may not be directly related to their performance. So what historically happened for many years is administrative degrees were one of the degrees that teachers would get to move to the right and not have any intention of being a principal. So the reason we say this in this background statement here is this program is designed to flip that on its head. Number one, if I get a master's degree in administration and I don't work as an administrator while I'm getting the degree and I'm a full-time teacher, I'm not really practicing the actual practical skills of administration. Number two, other than maybe a superficial internship, I'm not getting much for on-the-job training. So what we did with this program here is we said, we're going to pay for your master's degree, but we're going to have you work on day one as an actual administrator in the district. We're not going to have you sit on the sidelines and maybe never use it. So the reason that's there is to provide some historical context to why investing on the front end in our people actually gets us a much better return on investment, and it makes them better at their job because they dive in day one. While they're learning about being a principal with academic coursework, they're doing the job of being a principal. So this ultimately, over time, as those 140 folks probably never use their administrative degree, and in many cases they've sat on those degrees so long it would be a pay cut anyways. This allows us to recruit talented young administrators from in our district or from outside of the district, to ensure that we have a really exciting pipeline. In fact, many of the new principals we hired this year were people that were in our first and second cohorts. So that's the long story about the why behind this, but it really is a nationwide problem that people just get administrative degrees and sit on them. It's another reason we've added content area master's degrees for teachers, because the only master's degree that is really supported by research that moves the needle on student achievement is a content area master's degree. There's very little research, if any, that would support that getting an administrative degree makes somebody a better 6th grade teacher.
Thank you.
Mr. Rollins.
Well, actually, I had I was going to talk about Jay as well, but then I had a different one as well. So let's start with Jay. But to respond to your comment, Dr. Jarrett, and your question, Mr. Siegel, when I first got on the board 11 years ago, there was discussion about how there wasn't enough of a salary difference or compensation difference between teachers and administrators to incentivize people to become administrators. And we looked at that, and we actually at that point gave the administrators a pretty large increase in their salaries in order to create that delta. I have some concern that with the increases in teacher compensation and the fact that teachers have ways to pick up extra compensation, that there's not enough of a delta to really incentivize them to be administrators and to work either 11 or 12 months a year. And I've sort of gently tried to raise that over the past couple of years, and I think maybe finally the administration is maybe going to look at that, and we may have to do the same thing again. I don't think administrator compensation has kept pace with the increases in teacher compensation. So if you're looking at it as I can be a teacher and make this much money and work 9 months out of the year, or I can be an administrator and make this much little bit additional money but have to work 11 or 12 months a year, it starts not looking so great. The question that I had on Jay was, one of the other reasons to do this is we've had these discussions quite a bit about the need to diversify not only our teaching staff but our administrative staff. Again, the best way to do that is to try to grow your own. So my question is, how are we doing on those with these cohorts? What do the cohorts look like? How diverse are the cohorts? Is there anybody that can give me an answer?
I would be happy to provide the historical demographic breakdown. I can tell you for the current cohort 3 that is starting this fall, we have just 5 members in this cohort. One of them is Latina female. And then we have 2 females and 2 males, all Caucasian. But I can verify historically where we are with cohorts 1, 2, and 3 in an email to the board.
Okay. I had something on a different one. Is everybody done with Jay, or anybody else want to jump in on Jay? Like this, Jude.
I'll just jump in, and that is, so when we provide this education, and I understand that we put them in the classroom and they finish their 2 years, do we require them then to at least apply for a job? What else do we require of them?
The expectation for cohort 3 is that they'll commit to 3 years as an assistant principal once they complete the program and transition from a dean role to an assistant principal role.
Do they sign something that says that?
We have not signed that yet with them in terms of the expectation as we move forward. We were delayed again. The reason that we had to ask for permission to bring this forward with class beginning tomorrow is that we only just recently received the contract from NIU, and that delayed the process for signing what would be the promissory note for the commitment to additional years.
But we have a promissory note that they will be signing for that, and the first 2 cohorts did not sign anything? They are not?
They signed, but there was no requirement for administrative jobs.
What did they sign for?
To stay with the district for 3 additional years.
So they will stay, but they don't have to be an administrator. And my other comment is just on the numbers. I mean, I sent those out to the board members, but you know, we had 10 the first year from the district, 10 the second year. We're half of that this year, 5 with 1 minority female. It's disconcerting. I understand Tim's comment, and I know we're going to be looking at salary schedules, you know, for next year, but and I'm appreciative that we are no longer paying for a whole group we're not filling, because it did sound like a great savings, but and I am also appreciative for using the waivers, but I wonder if we talk to our teachers, what would incentivize them to want to participate in something that would give them a free, you know, another level of education. We're just not, they're just not there. Do we have an idea why?
I would say part of the problem is likely the salary compression that you have described, which is something that we're looking into. I think another untapped option is using this as a recruitment tool for external candidates, teachers and other districts that we would want to bring in to the principal pipeline. That's something I'll be working closely with Dr. Reed in his new capacity this year.
So my other was on M, which is the Cintas.
Excuse me.
Oops, sorry.
Just before we go a little further, Dr. Jarrett mentioned about the content masters. Have we did anything specific on encouraging our staff to focus on the content masters, and have we offered any additional incentives in doing so? And then I have a question
I'm
on
glad you
G,
asked.
which is backwards.
Yes, we have, yes. In fact, I believe we are 3 cohorts in now of content area masters. So we understand that not all high-performing teachers want to have the next step of their career be administration, and we do believe in the power of content area master's degrees. So I believe we are in our 3rd content-based master's cohort. We have partnerships with both Northern Illinois and Rockford University at this point.
And they have signed as well?
I believe they also sign a promissory note. I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm not, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rollins.
Cintas. So the contract is attached, and these are just contract questions. Nobody gets excited about this but me. If you look at the contract addendum, there's 3 bullet points here that I hope we've looked at, because this has us accepting an awful lot of responsibility and indemnifying them and releasing them from liability. Ms. Goldstein-Smith?
Yes, with respect to the Cintas agreement, we did send that to outside counsel for review, and they're in the process of drafting a rider to address concerns like the indemnification provisions. So the rider was expected early this week, so either today or tomorrow, and that will be going in addition to the draft that you're reviewing.
And can you just make sure, and I absolutely hate this stuff, buried in the middle of this is a link to their master agreement.
Correct.
So just make sure that they've looked at the master agreement to see what's in that.
Yes, when we send to outside counsel, and whenever we see those internally embedded agreements, as a part of our practice here, we do have them print out that link and attach that to what the board is receiving. Okay. So whenever we see those internally, that has been the legal department's practice.
All right, thanks.
And may I also add on the NIU principal cohort, I just wanted to leave the board with clarity on that qualifying position. Earlier this year, after it became an issue with the people not then leaving the assistant principal and principal positions after participating in the program, we did add language to that agreement indicating that they should remain in a qualifying position for a certain duration of time after completion of the program. If they do not, it would trigger that repayment provision.
Any other questions about the consent items?
I do have a question, and I apologize for going backwards, but Mr. Siegel was ahead of me. So on G, the bidding, I see that we have Stenstrom Construction and Miller Engineering. Are those the only 2 that, did we have any other?
Ms. Pearson, those are the only 2 contractors that submitted bids. We had multiple people attend the pre-bid meeting. One of the contractors is currently doing 5 of our projects, phase 1 projects, and decided not to bid this, but will be bidding on phase 2 and phase 3 projects.
Okay, and so are the bids submitted electronically?
No, they're opened in person.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure of that.
Yeah.
And the pre-bidding meeting, how is that communicated to the public?
It's advertised on our website as well as in the paper, and most of these do get emailed out to contractors that we've worked with in the past.
Have you considered contacting the media, that there would be a clip in the news about it?
Well, I can definitely work with purchasing on other opportunities to advertise these projects.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. McCulley?
I'm actually going to end on a little giggle, and that is with the recurring contract for Brightly, who seems to have changed their name from Dude Solutions. Somehow, maybe they found that to be politically incorrect. But I am glad that they did. That didn't look good on ours. Thanks.
Mr. Rollins?
Could I add one thing to the HVAC upgrades, just to update the board? So these 4 projects were bid in the early spring, and the low bids came in at $28,283,000. That is why we pulled them. They came in significantly over budget because of supply chain and just material costs. So we worked with our engineering groups, redesigned in some cases, value engineered in other cases, and the fall bid coming in low bid at $23 million. I just want to point out is actually $4.9 million under what we received in the spring, and $1.6 million under what we had had a base budget. So after redesigning and then looking at what our earlier projects came in at and what those costs were, we put together a budget estimate of $25 million. Bids came in at 23.3, so 1.6 million under what we had budgeted. So a lot of work on the engineering team and design and construction part, and we pulled back 4.9 from what we originally were looking at in the spring. I just wanted to make sure I updated the board on that.
Thank you. Mr. Rollins?
Just made me wonder if there's any updates on whether the federal government is going to extend the whole program.
At this point, we actually have a meeting with Mr. Cassidy and Representative Bustos' group on Thursday to talk a little bit about that. We hadn't received any updates, so I reached out to Mr. Cassidy, and so he's reached back out to our representatives here in the state.
And we're continuing to work on that, but everything we've heard has been positive. I've been networking with our larger statewide agencies on this topic, like LUDA, and I know Mr. Brown or Dr. Brown in CFO circles, you're relatively confident, correct, Dr. Brown?
It sure looks like it, but it looks like they're going to push it back to the states, and the states are actually going to have to request it from the Department of Ed. So it doesn't look like it will be a blanket universal that everybody's going to get it. I think they'll have states actually request to be able to participate in the extension. So it's just a little bit unclear right now.
But this will become a very high lobbying priority because a push to 2026, while it would be slightly slower in terms of getting all of the projects finished, we would be able to do so much more with those federal dollars because of the supply chain pressure. What we are doing, no matter what, Dr. Brown and our entire team have come together with Mike to make sure that we are bidding all of the projects with multi-year time horizons, correct? So if you want to just share a little bit more about kind of the way the team is going to approach that. More to come, I think, in terms of finding millions of dollars of savings, not only by trying to ensure that we can maximize the number of bidders, but also taking some of the cost uncertainty through tighter timelines. So,
yeah. So we have this entire summer we've worked with our engineering teams to design phase 2 and phase 3 projects to make sure that we're bidding these earlier to get on our contractor's book earlier, rather than fighting all the other schools or other projects that are out there bidding in the early winter time period. So we are also looking at, if we are able to push this off 18 months, potentially bidding just 4 more projects for next summer and pushing the others out to the following year, hopefully letting those material prices go down a little bit, as well as taking some of the projects off the books. So hopefully more contractors come to the table. So,
Mr. Phillips, we'll be ready to go either way, depending on the federal. We'll obviously bid more of them over a multi-year period, correct, or we will break them up and extend the timeline if we're given that option.
Yep.
Okay, that concludes our portion of the meeting.
Excuse me. Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Mr. Rollins, you're up next with the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and Dr. Brown is walking to the mic. So No, he's not leaving. I will now turn the meeting over to Greg Brown, Chief Financial Officer, for a preliminary discussion on the 2022 levy. Just a reminder, our levy is on a calendar year basis. Our budget goes from July 1st to June 30th, so the levy crosses our fiscal years. So this would be for, I always get this mixed up. So for the 2022 levy is what the taxes that will be levied and collected in 2023, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. And we passed the levy resolution in November?
Correct.
Correct. All right, thanks.
Yep. And it'll actually hit in the FY23 budget. Some of the money will, and the rest of it will hit in the FY24 budget. So the dates don't make sense, but that's just unfortunately the way it works out. So just to give you a little bit of background on where we're at right now, we have received some preliminary estimates from the county assessor's office on what we think the equalized assessed value, which is what EAV stands for, will be in, and they're projecting actually an 8.9% increase. So when we took the initial look at the budget clear back in the springtime, we were hoping to maybe get around 5% or so. So this came in significantly higher. We chalk a lot of that up to what they call the quadrennial assessment, which is when they reassess property, all property in the entire county once every 4 years. So some properties may not get it every year, some do get it every year, but the ones that were on an off cycle definitely get it in what they call a quadrennial reassessment year. New property came in about 7.1 million, and so we think that number is going to hold. And then as far as CPI goes, CPI actually came in at 7%. So they used the CPI calculation from the previous December, which is December of 2021. And Winnebago and Boone counties, which the school district operates in, are actually in what they call tax cap counties. So no matter what the CPI is, you can never collect more than 5%. So that's what it means to be in a tax cap county. So even though CPI came in at 7, we could never collect more than 5 if we chose to go that high. Now, again, those EAV increases right now are still estimates. There's still a tax appeal process that goes on in the fall, and so those EAVs could change just a little bit. So when you look at this schedule, you can look at the starting point for the 2008 tax levy year. That was a high point in the district as far as value goes at about 2.848 million. So you can see 14 years later down at the blue highlighted area down there in 2022, we're still not back to where we were in 2008. So it's been a slow climb after the real estate crash, and we're still not there yet. Coming close, but still not there. We're assuming that the following year in 23 that we'll be back above that 2008 levy. As you can see in the tax levy column, the tax levy has remained flat really over that period of time. You might see a slight difference there in that far right column. Some of that's due to what the EAV changed from the estimate that the assessor's office originally gave us, and then what it ended up being in the springtime when they finished all the appeal processes and things like that. 2020 is the exception to that. That would have been a year where new property was actually captured. So sometimes you can get a slight difference in that tax levy too if bond payments are not consistent from one year to the next, because we don't actually set the levy on bond payments. The clerk's office actually sets the levy on the bond payments. So once a bond referendum's passed, they're the ones that actually set the tax levy needed to collect those approved dollars. So the next slide goes over the equalized assessed value for the district. You can see, that high water year of 2008 and then what it's dropped down to over the years. Again, we're projecting for it to be, about 2.73 million. This next slide just explains how the tax rate and the equalized assessed value work with each other. On the far left-hand side, when you have a declining EAV, that's when your tax rate tends to go high. In the middle, you see if EAV stays level, then your tax rate generally stays level if you're asking for the same amount of money. And if your existing EAV goes up, like we've seen since 2008, your tax rate just naturally goes down because you're spreading the dollars that you're asking the taxpayers from over a larger base. This is just a history of what the Consumer Price Index did in 2021. Anybody who's been grocery shopping knows how the Consumer Price Index has really escalated. You can see that in January of 2021, CPI was 1.4, and by the end of the year, it had gone all the way up to 7%. The next slide shows what it's done so far this year, which has escalated all the way up to 9.1% in June, dropped a little bit down to 8.5% in July, and the CPI for August is actually going to get released a week from today. Energy prices are down, but food prices are up, and so we're really not too sure where the CPI is going to come in. No matter what, even if we had flat CPI for the whole rest of the year, it would still be in excess of the tax cap amount of 5%. So you can just see what the impact has been with CPI. The good news is that we're starting to see people come back into the labor force, which hopefully will take some pressure maybe off of the labor side of increases as more people actually participate back in the labor force. So tax rates, this is a bit of good news. Holding the line on the levy over the last number of years has resulted in the district being in the bottom half as far as tax rates go. You can see we're sitting at 6.26%, and that was on the tax bill that just came out here in the last spring. So one thing, there's a note there on the bottom too, North Boone and Belvedere do benefit from a county-wide facility sales tax, and depending on how that money is used, it can significantly decrease the tax rate in those counties. And so, you see that being a benefit, on the low end with Belvedere's tax rate. So what we're looking at for tax levy options for 2022 are really, there should be a zero up there, because you can do nothing at all and just levy for what we've levied in the past. A is really including just new property in what we levy for, and then B would be including the CPI increase of 5% plus the new property. These scenarios right here will show you in that first column what happens if we do nothing and basically just levy for the dollars that we've levied for in the previous year. And you can see on the bottom line there of that first column of numbers where it says total rate, it looks like there's a real good chance that the tax rate's probably going to come in at about 5.73. So significant drop even from the current year of 6.26. We're going to get well below 5.73. The second column is A, that new property, and that shows you what would happen if we took just taxes on the new property. Total rate there stays the same, 5.7299, and you probably wonder why it doesn't change if we take, taxes on new property. The tax rate's actually set based on the existing property from the prior year, because they need to be able to calculate a tax rate that they can apply to the new property. And so it doesn't tax any more to existing property owners, it just actually puts a tax on the new property owners. And then the third column would be the allowable 5% increase. Even though CPI was 7%, that would still probably end up in a rate that's just a little bit below 6 at 5.99. So that would generate about $7.5 million in new property tax. So this next one is just a quick history of where the tax rate has gone, and you can see that it's been a consistent decline, over the last, 6-7 years. It shows what we think the rate's probably going to come in at 2022 under either one of those scenarios, A or B. And then what we'd like to recommend, and obviously this will be up to you guys to decide, would be to just capture the taxes on just a new property for the current year. I know there's been, quite a bit of press here recently about the mayor asking people to hold the line on tax increases. And so, we're obviously aware of that. And have really, tailored this recommendation toward, holding the line on existing property owners, but capturing the tax dollars that are available on new property. So, and with that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Connor.
Yeah, this isn't so much a question, but really a comment. Number one, we can't see enough how the tax rate has gone down, and that's what I'll point out is before all the splash of publicity about asking everyone to do that, we have been doing it for 10 years.
Correct.
And so I think that shows a real commitment. And what I would say to the taxpayers is, you should pay attention to those that have really followed that. And I'm glad you brought up about sales taxes, because that is something we've talked about as one of the alternatives. But one of the things I would also like to point out is that the actual documents or the artifacts that we show have really improved over the years. And what I would say is a lot of the information that's presented now, I think is very digestible by taxpayers out in the community. And it's really good. And let me just say, it's particularly good to see things like the comparison of the districts. I think that's very, we get criticized. So let's just say this straight up. The biggest portion of the tax rate in Winnebago County is us. That's just, and especially if you are not in Rockford, and that's really particularly true. So we have to acknowledge that that is a reality, but we have been addressing it. And this really shows it to have the comparisons, but I really like the fact that the scenarios are laid out so people understand the impact of dollars and cents of both of what we give up by not doing it and what the effect is on that tax rate. So I really like these charts. And the charts that say this is the projections. So one of the things I would like to say is for all the publicity that's been out there, the one taxing body that's been very transparent for quite a few years now, and with the new charts, I really give a lot of credit to the finance department for having things that are understandable and available to the public. So this is really, from my point of view, a good set of documents. Hate to get all effusive over financial documents, because that's just not most people's cup of tea, but I have to give credit for the clarity and how much this has really improved over the years.
Mr. Siegel?
Thank you. And there's a little bit of nuance that I wanted to throw into this conversation since I got on the board 6.5 years ago. And that is, each year we've seen very similar charts, and they all reference 2008, as that high point of value. And I think it's interesting that we always call it that high point of value when I look back and think that's the point where the balloon had the maximum amount of gas in it. And when that gas was let out, we see what happened. Even with some elevated real estate values or home prices at the point of sale in the last year or two, we are much closer to having legitimate values on our properties. And that is really good news for property owners, is that they actually have something of real value that is concrete, it's measurable. And I think that that's an important thing to consider, especially when you look at 14 years later, we're taking, $1.2 million more than what we were taking at that badly bloated tax value time. actually last night I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we just didn't even take new property? Because I was thinking, there were several years where we didn't take any new property. And then I remembered, it was really easy. There was no new property. For years, we would literally have no new property. We have $300,000 in new property, and it was because of houses that the school district built. Today I've been thinking that taking new property seems like a reasonable thing to do. It is just simply including those properties in valuations that we didn't know were going to exist when we received this levy. So I guess I'm starting the conversation with I am supportive of option A, of taking the new property, and I realize that this is a significant divergence from where I have been in my time on the board. I don't see taking CPI, but I do definitely see taking new property. Thank you.
Mr. Connor, did you have more? Your light's still on.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. McCulloch?
I forgot you're over there. So if North Boone did the sales tax, their rate is still really high. I'm just trying to understand why. And I don't know that you know, but.
I do know.
Okay.
And I can tell you why their rate's still high is because they did not use the money to actually abate their tax rate. They've just stockpiled the cash. And so Belvedere actually, when the referendum got approved to go ahead and take the sales tax, the Belvedere School Board actually put a board policy in place that said that they would use the incremental money to abate the bond and the interest payments. And so over a period of time, they've abated $20+ million worth of bond and interest payments with the sales tax they've collected. So Belvedere's rate is probably artificially low by probably 20 points there. It's probably more like 5.95, something like that. But it's due to the fact that they use the countywide facility sales tax to reduce their bond and the interest levy.
Well, they don't have a sunset on that, right?
No, it's there in perpetuity.
And what is their percentage?
Theirs is 5.74 right now.
On their taxes? Rate. So it's 1% on their sales tax?
Yeah, full 1%. Yep.
And what's North Boone?
It's 1% for the whole county.
For the whole county?
Yep.
And Mrs. McCulloch, we get a little taste of that too. I believe the last check I signed off was $92, I think, in our pocket.
That's right.
So thanks to North Boone and Belvedere for their efforts there in Boone County, because we do get a small piece of that.
Yeah.
So we have talked about it before, but it's been a few years. So the county, it's a county tax, and so it gets approved at the county level in a referendum if it gets approved, and then it gets divided among all school districts in that county based upon, on a percentage basis, based upon their enrollment.
That's correct.
And so a little tiny piece of our school district extends into Boone County, which is why we got the $92.
Every month.
Oh, it's every month.
Yeah.
The question I've got on the new, well, I've got one question, one comment on the new property. The question is, the request from the city that everybody hold the line. Is the city taking new property? Do we have any idea what they mean by hold the line? Are they saying let's just hold the line on the levies? Are they just saying let's not take CPI?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I've talked a little bit to Todd Cagnoni about what they're planning to do, and he hasn't said one way or the other whether they're looking at, just an all-out not doing anything or whether they're looking at new property. I definitely know they're not looking at CPI, so you may have had some different conversations.
I believe they are interpreting it as keeping the exact same dollar amount the same as what they collected last year. So whatever last year's dollar amount was, that's the dollar amount they will collect this year.
Okay. And that's the approach that we have been taking. I do understand now that you've explained it, that it doesn't affect the tax rate for this levy year. But it would affect the tax rate for the next levy year. There's a 1-year lag because we will be levying more with that new property if we've increased the levy. And so it will have after a 1-year lag, it will have an effect on the rate. It's not a huge effect. The question to me is more, whether it's since we have sort of provided leadership on this issue, whether we should, if that's the city's position, whether we should just sort of in solidarity with the city, just do the same thing and hold our levy the same. I actually don't feel strongly one way or the other. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. Just a couple of other things since we're talking about this, and just a couple of things I've learned over the years that are interesting and that you may use in talking points. Talking about some of these other districts, some of these districts, people who live in those districts pay close to 80%. If you're in the Harlem School District, you pay close to 80% of your property taxes to the Harlem School District. If you live in the Rockford School District, you pay about 51% of your real estate taxes to the Rockford School District. So people in Rockford, and they probably always will, blame us for their high taxes, but the reality is we are getting the smallest percentage of real estate taxes of any of the surrounding districts. It's just because we have so many taxing bodies in Rockford that the other municipalities don't. The municipalities in the Harlem School District don't collect property taxes. They get all their revenue from sales taxes. You know, we have a Rockford City Library, we've got the Rockford Park District, we've got the Rockford Airport Authority. All of those taxing bodies tax people in Rockford, and if you live up in Loves Park or McChesney Park or any of the surrounding districts, you're not paying taxes to any of those districts. And that's really the difference in the taxes between Rockford and living outside of Rockford. I'm trying to think what the other thing I was going to mention. So the other thing that actually surprised me when I learned it, because you think of Rockford as being an industrial city and a commercial city, well over 70% of our tax revenue, our real estate tax revenue, is from residential real estate. So when we make these decisions, if you think that, oh, you know, it's businesses that are paying this, that's not it. We're making these decisions, they affect homeowners overwhelmingly. So we do need to keep that in mind as well.
We had this conversation last year too. We didn't take new?
I don't believe we took new property last year.
We talked about it. We're at the same place we were, but we chose not to at that time. Okay. So what's the timing on?
So this will actually come back in October, and then we'll have a similar workup to this. And then in October, if you guys can make a decision on what you want to see, you know, based on that, then we'll actually bring the real actual levy that we'd like you guys to approve in November. So we're still going to talk about this at least one more meeting. We'll have these scenarios laid out, and then you can pick one, and then in November, that's the one we'll bring back for you guys to approve.
So everybody kind of needs to speak up in October so they know what to bring back in November is what I hear you saying.
That would be great.
Any other questions, discussion? Thank you, Dr. Braun. The consent items, preview of consent items. A, Discovery Center ARP-ESSER funding. Discovery Center Museum programming will serve RPS students at the Riverfront Museum Park. The program will keep students engaged in extended time learning that supports our district's universal goals. B, Salvation Army ARP-ESSER. Salvation Army programming will serve RPS students at its facility location on South Rockford. This program will help keep students engaged in extended time learning that support our district's universal goals. State Line Youth for Christ. The person who does these, is she here? Yeah. My script isn't consistent with the executive summary. Can you just come up here and clarify something? So what schools are they serving?
For which program? State Line?
State Line Youth for Christ, who has two different programs, but it's
yes. They have a program at Jefferson, East, Guilford, and then at their site in the summer called Campus Life, which also serves Guilford students.
Okay. All right, so we know those are the three schools.
Yes.
The State Line Youth for Christ proposal has two programs, True North and Project Foundations. Project True North seeks to provide the students at all three of those schools? Okay, that's not what the script says.
I'm sorry, they're at True North is at two of the schools. It's at East and at Guilford. And then Project Foundations is at Jefferson.
Okay, so Project Foundations is only at Jefferson?
Yes.
All right. So let me see if I can edit here. Project True North seeks to provide Guilford and East students, is that correct? With an extended time program geared toward cultivating positive decision-making and providing social, emotional, and behavioral assistance and positive role models for youth who participate in this program. Additionally, Project True North seeks to provide students who participate in this program a safe space to talk with mentors about issues they may be experiencing. The goal of Project Foundations is to provide, and that's students at Jefferson, an extended time SEL group to help participants with life skills that will assist them in learning to work well with others while also promoting healthy emotional regulation patterns and coping skills when responding to anxiety, anger, and depression. Okay. So I guess the question is going to be why just those three? Why wasn't Auburn included?
If I had to answer for the organization, which is not something I love to do, I would say it's a capacity. They have 2 people who are spearheading those programs. That's definitely a question I can bring back to the organization, though.
Okay, well, that's a question I'd have. Does anybody have any questions about any of those 3? Ms. Mohammed?
Roosevelt did as well.
Just a quick question, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but do you know if they're already planning on continuing to service students that are already enrolled in these programs, or do they have recruitment goals to try to reach more?
Yes, so the program is an expansion. It's been in schools before, which is possibly why it's not at Auburn. It has previously been at Jefferson and at Guilford. And the expansion of the program is at a request from the principals. So that's part of why it's expanding, because they saw a lot of success with the program last year. And they did receive funding last year, and they braided the funding for this proposal even with a grant that they had received from another organization. I don't want to say who it is in case I'm wrong. So to answer your question, they had a lot of students that were already participating, so they wanted to add on additional resources.
So do like principals or maybe counselors as well, like recommend students to get set up with these programs, or do you know how they attain like their actual like students that participate?
I would have to go back into the proposal and read that, but I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Ms. McCulloch?
I just wanted to say that Roosevelt is one of our other high schools, and I'm not sure that some of those students might not have some of the same needs, so.
They did submit an additional proposal for Roosevelt that I passed on to another part of our to a different team, because there were parts of that proposal that were a little bit more in depth and lined a little bit more with college and career readiness. For some of the items they wanted to purchase were outside of the scope of what we could purchase through our BESSER. So we are talking with them about a program at Roosevelt.
Okay, any other questions about those 3 programs? The only other item I have is the following consent agenda item that will be brought to the September 27th, 2022 board meeting for approval. RFP 2313, security alarm monitoring and response. You'll notice we don't have anything in our executive summary about that. I assume, is Mr. Youngblood here? No. Do you know the status of that, Mr. Phillips?
This is similar to our current contract with Permar. That was up, so they went out for a request for proposal for that. I believe it's coming 9/27 is.
But have we received proposals, or have we had an opening date yet?
I don't know that.
We did. They're in. Oh. They're still in the process of evaluating them right now.
How many did we get?
We only got 2 in.
Okay.
So does that mean it actually comes to us next week for a first read, because you don't have enough information to call this a first read? No, or is it a consent? So it doesn't matter. So everything will just be the 20th. Thank you.
That completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
All right, thank you. Governance Committee does not have any new items for you, so we'll go to the preview of, although we have consent agenda items. So we have the typical meeting minutes, contract to purchase orders, the RBMA tentative agreement, the MOU of family attendance, the MOU of missed planning time, Freedom of Information log. Would any of the board members like further information on any of those? We have staff here to answer.
Quick question about 12D, the MOU for family attendance. When I was looking at that attachment, looking on the last page with the signatures, I'm assuming, was this just a typo? Because it refers to the 2017-2018 academic year.
Ms. Goldsmith?
Yes, that is a typo. Yep. Yes, it's a typo.
That MOU was supposed to be updated and replaced. Ms. Fromm has that, so I thought it already was replaced on our system.
Okay, so it's supposed to be this current one, 2022 to 23?
It's to run through 2025.
Okay, and we'll see that basically at the next board meeting then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, the family attendance one, I know we had talked about this for a while. Was there discussion on this among staff? I mean, because if I remember, one of the reasons behind this is it came from teachers.
Yeah, the only change that that we're making here, or we're requesting, is that this apply to new teachers. In the past, we had a rule that you had to teach in the district for 1 year. So that's okay. The impetus.
Okay, thank you.
No other lights? Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where it relates to zoning. So this may be a little off, but since we're here, we're talking about family a little bit. So if a student is enrolled at Roosevelt and their initial enrollment was at Roosevelt, and they changed address. I'm thinking of a kid that may be living between two. And they're a senior, how does that affect them? Do they have the same liberty to continue to finish their credit hours, or?
Run all the way over here to turn on the mic and say yes. Yes.
Okay, so just for clarity and understanding.
If they were to move out of district, outside the district zones, then they wouldn't qualify for Roosevelt since it's a RPS 205 institution. But as long as they are in district zoned at one of the 4 home high schools, then they would be able to continue at Roosevelt. That would be the expectation.
Okay, so if it's a complicated situation where this kid lived with both parents, like split custody or a joint custody, and live in different, one home is in district and one is out, how does that work?
Typically, there may be a family plan related to that circumstance, and if the court order indicated a residence for educational purposes, we would defer to that court order. Otherwise, residency is defined by statute as where the student's nighttime abode is. So we would look at where they spend the majority of their nights.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Since you're on that one, when you raise that, do we still give a certain number of seats per school, per high school? And if we do, does that get taken off of another? I mean, because they're already assigned for the year, right?
Speaking of just Roosevelt, in terms of,
Yeah, that was her question. Yeah.
no, we don't do a ratio or a prorated amount of seats at Roosevelt for the homeschools, as maybe if you look at the Ombudsman Innovative Learning Center contract, there in the past we've had a fixed amount of seats because of how we contract with them. At Roosevelt, though, because students have to apply to Roosevelt, students get priority ranking for seats based off of a number of criterion, primarily those students that are closer to meeting graduation requirements would have higher up.
Right. I had it incorrect in my head. It's Ombudsman that we did the 100 seats each. Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. You.
So back on the family attendance, is it that the current policy just requires not that they be in the school district for a year, they work in the school district for a year, but that they actually work at that school for a year before their child can attend that school? Is that correct? Correct.
Yes.
So just so everybody understands the background, when we were first approached about this, one of the concerns we had was that, you know, there's already seen as, or a perception that teachers try to post out to go to the good schools and leave the bad leave the bad schools. And we were concerned about creating an incentive for them to do that. And that was one of the guardrails we put on this when we agreed to try it. But that's also why we asked for the data that Mrs. McCulloch or somebody from the administration circulated. And it does not appear that that has happened. Now, I guess one of the questions I've got is, we had that guardrail in place. Did that help prevent it from happening? And so if the proposal is that we're going to do this, when we did it originally, we did it as a one-year agreement, and then we extended it based on the good results that we got. We're now talking about doing this as a multi-year agreement?
I believe we have it set to expire in 25, so it would be a multi-year agreement.
Okay. I guess I continue to have some concern that we would be creating that incentive, and that if we do it as a multi-year agreement, there wouldn't be anything we could do about it if it starts shifting in that direction.
Mr. Rollins, excellent point about the guardrails. And, you know, there are two things that are fundamentally different from the last time. One is we do have the data that we can look at, and you are correct. We always could consider that the guardrail helped prevent that. But number two, and I think even more significantly, in the last 5 years, what we've been able to do with evidence-based funding is ensure that schools in our district that have a lower average age of experience of teachers and typically serve a higher percentage of low-income students are actually funded at a higher per pupil rate right now in our district. So one of the problems we were trying to solve was the issue of per pupil spending actually being greater in parts of our community that had a lower percentage of need. And so we've really addressed that pretty significantly. I shared in the most recent board report. In fact, you could see some really exciting trends that have come up where we see that the middle school that spends the most per pupil, which by a large margin is Kennedy Middle School at almost $20,000 per pupil. The schools that are spending the most at the elementary level are Ellis, Lemon, and McIntosh. So as we are seeing need have a higher per pupil spending, that has sort of counteracted one of the core issues, which is sort of a flight of experienced teachers driving additional per pupil spending. So I can say one of the reasons I felt okay with even bringing this to the board is that has largely been addressed through the board's and the administration's use of evidence-based funding to ensure that our schools that have the greatest need spend the most money now.
So would you be more comfortable if it wasn't multi-year?
Yes.
I mean, that's certainly something that the board could entertain as an amendment if we have consensus that we want to see it on a year-by-year basis. We were all concerned when we put this in place that there would be this big flight of teachers to the to certain schools because they wanted their students to go there even though they didn't live in that zone. And pleasantly surprised that people went both directions, to some of the lower income schools as well as some of the ones with less of the lower income. So that was the reason I had them generate that for everyone so that you could see that it wasn't just one way. But if there is a consensus to have this just for to be voted on annually, I mean, that's certainly something we can. We just don't want to be making exceptions because people are asking for them, so it needs to be policy. So does anybody else have any thought on that before it comes back to you for a vote at the next meeting? Ms. Pearson?
So this would be very similar to a teacher going to a specific school, their child is enrolled, and after a year, it doesn't matter where that teacher goes, that child is still at the school of their choice.
No, if the teacher moves, the child goes back to their own school, or they could go with the teacher to the next school because we took away the 1 year piece.
The exception to the zone policy is given to a teacher essentially bringing his or her child to work.
I see.
Yeah.
It was raised as an issue that would be a good strategy for teacher retention, and we were pleasantly surprised to see that, as REA teachers told us when we had initial conversations 6+ years ago, that it did truly it was not just used as a tool to kind of subvert our zone policy. It does seem that the data supports, at least 6 years in, that it largely is the desire to have the child be able to come to work with where the parent works.
So what is a greater concern then with the multi-year?
So the concern was, let's just say there's a school that's seen as being desirable, and you have teachers who have elementary school children, and they all try to get a job at that school so that they can take their child there. That's not really what we want to see happen. On the other hand, what we were hearing is that we have, especially, this is all really mostly an elementary school issue, that when they have very young children, it is very helpful to them to have the child in the same school as them, because then they can take them to school with them. They don't have to worry about getting them on a bus. They can stay after, the child can stay after a few minutes with them afterwards while they finish up their work day. So there was a benefit to doing that, and it was seen as a good retention tool. Because of our concern that we didn't want to create an incentive for teachers to suddenly all teachers post in with elementary school children, post into what are perceived as the good schools, we put this little guardrail on there that you can't just post into a school and then bring your child with you. That you have to work in that school for a year before this is even an option. That was the guardrail we put on. We're taking that off. That's what this does. We're taking that guardrail off. Now, if you look at the data, the concerns that we expressed didn't materialize. And as Mrs. McCulloch has said, if you actually look at the data, a lot of it went the other way. I mean, you can see teachers eating their own cooking, bringing their kids to schools that, I mean, you might think that they would rather have them in their home school, in their home zone schools. So our concerns, based on the policy that we have in place right now, did not materialize. We're changing the policy. I guess my point is, when we did it originally, we said we'll do this for 1 year and we'll see how it works. We saw how it worked. It was fine. We extended it. We extended it. We extended it. The proposal now, as I understand it, is we're going to make this change and make the change in effect through the end of the 2025 school year, a multi-year change. So we're going to make this change, and nobody will have an ability to, if things do start shifting in the other direction, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it until 2026.
I'm not sure I want to support that. If it's going to paralyze the ability to.
I just think, if we do it for 1 year, it'll be the same situation we had before. Hopefully everything's going to work out great, and then we just redo it every year.
Yeah, I wish that.
That's something to consider too.
Yeah, I wish that sheet was attached. I don't think it's here with the movement because surprisingly there were high school and middle school movement. I was shocked at the number of, Auburn, Guilford back and forth, and I think there was a Kennedy on there too. So when
I guess the data would be helpful.
Well, I sent it to you. Do we?
You sent it today?
No, I sent it a while back. The rest of you got it? I'm looking for it so I can resend, and I'm not finding it in my emails. Yeah, I sent it to everybody. Who sent it to me? Christina. Christina did, right, Aaron? So,
But I may have,
that you forwarded it?
streamlined it, so maybe for me.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of extra columns.
Okay, I found it on, should have been about September 2nd, so. And, yeah, we had Guilford to East, we had Auburn to Guilford, East to Guilford, Brookview to Cherry Valley to Gregory, Johnson to Hillman, Cherry Valley to Washington, Brookview to Lewis Lemon, Flynn to Eisenhower, Froburg to Rolling Green, West to Flynn, East to Guilford East. So we had movement both directions, but at all levels. Welsh to Bloom, Westview to Brookview, Bloom to Carlson, Spring Creek to Ellis. So again, this is in place. We've been doing it. How many years have we been doing it, Mr. Sedeker? 17, okay. And the only difference that is being sought is that they don't have a year, the teacher doesn't have to be in the school a year prior to being able to bring their student over. And realistically, I don't know how much we'll see out of it. I mean, school's already started. I don't know how many teachers are moving there. And there has to be space at the school. I mean, we won't create another classroom to bring somebody over if all those classes are full. So that's another caveat on it. And if a teacher leaves that school, yes, their student goes back to their home school. And I suppose it really does affect a teacher. If a teacher moves to a different school and we leave the 1 year that they have to wait, then they couldn't just bring their student with them to the next school. They'd have to go to their zone school for a year, and then they could go with the teacher. So
okay, so it's the 1 year.
That's all we're
requirement.
Changing,
period.
It's the 1 year piece.
Okay, okay. I don't have a problem with that.
With just taking it to when it happens. David, you had your light on, but you turned it off. Did you have something?
Just to suggest that this is something that I think could be, as long as there's a change, like when it was first introduced, just take it year to year and see. Unless there is some, concrete benefit to making it 3 years versus 1 year.
So June's shaking her head, yes. I know how Tim feels. I know how you feel. I just need to know if we have enough board members that feel that way so that that legal brings it back to us for 1 year. One is Mike? Okay. So we'll do it this year and see how many brand new teachers move their children, right, this year, and then you can have another conversation, whoever's here at this table next year. The other pieces from governance, y'all understood the missed planning time. Nobody had any questions about that. That was the increase. Again, we're just extending what we did last year, and that is paying more for the missed planning time at the $40 rate instead of the $27.50. And then, I don't know, did y'all have a chance to read through the RBMA contract? Did anybody have any questions about that? It sounds like we did a pretty decent job negotiating, eliminated ancillary benefits for retirees such as life and accident insurance, increased health insurance premiums for retirees, but they did manage to include increased insurance premiums for the PPO 1000 plan, elimination of, I already said that. And they didn't get a raise last year, so this contract puts them at a 6% raise to make up for that. And then 3% increase for, well, it's 6%, and then 3.5 for 24, and 3.0 for 25, and 3.0 for 26. So it's 4 years. I'm sure if there's any question, either legal or HR could answer those. Okay, they've already voted on it, correct, and approved it. All right, so those are our consent items from governance. Seeing no additional lights. I don't think we have any speakers. All right. Does anybody have any, do any of the board members have anything else they'd like to bring to the board? Ms. Pearson?
Yes, thank you. So I believe it was back in June when we had the presentation about the Title I funding, and they were going to provide a report on, I did get some information, but I never received the number of denials and the reasons. And I was just told every time I brought it up that they were still working on the data.
If I recall, there was only one denial that we had record of. There were lots of turnbacks for revisions, but I'll follow up with Dr. Wolf to see where we are on that.
Okay, so in that report, even the turnbacks would include the reason that they requested it, correct?
Yes, there's a note section in our workflow for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask board members just to let me know I'm already close to being at a quorum for the meeting in October. The second meeting, I think, is the 11th. That's the day after Indigenous Peoples Day, which we do not have off for the school district this year because we moved that day off into the Thanksgiving week. But I need to make sure that we have, it is a full meeting, so we would have closed and open. So I need to make sure that we have a quorum for that. So if there's anybody else that is possibly not going to be, that is definitely not going to be there that day, please, would you reach out to me and let me know? I've got yours, yes, and mine, and questionable, and so we need everybody else here.
That's the second, you said that in October?
In October, that would be the second Tuesday. Yeah.
There's a possibility I won't, but I'll let you know for sure.
Okay, because we'll need to know, because if we're missing 4, then we'd have to move the meeting. And if there's no further comments or agenda recommendations.
Ms. McCulloch?
Oh, I'm sorry, where?
Over here.
There you are. Yes.
I just want to clarify what you're looking for the MOU with family attendance. You only want it through this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I would suggest at least running it through next year because most of the transfers have already occurred. They occur in the later spring, summer. So I don't know if you'll get good data on that.
You're okay? Rest of the group okay? Thank you. We'll take your suggestion. Okay. One more time before somebody surprises me. There are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board. I'll take a motion in a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Same sign? No. Thank you.